Sometimes the line art is what makes something look more flat. We don't have line arts in real life. We only have light and color. So I'm going to cover the edges of the lips with the skin color and then paint the lips over it. I want them to feel more three-dimensional while keeping them simple. When painting teeth, it's very easy to end up with something that looks a bit weird. A great technique to make the teeth look realistic in a few steps is by drawing them as one block. So I suggest to avoid painting each teeth separately because even though that's how they are in real life, it doesn't translate the same way in a drawing. The color is also very important. Teeth are almost never white. They're actually kind of dark because they're covered by the lips, so less light reaches it. And they tend to be a grayish tone, so they can go towards the purple or the blue or the yellow. That depends on the picture. So, as I was saying, start with one block that defines the shape of the teeth, and then with a lighter color, you can draw each tooth, keeping the separation between each teeth very subtle. To make the space between the lips and the teeth more defined, I will paint that gap with a dark red. You can use this to model the shape of the teeth. So instead of using gray, you invert the process by filling the area around it, which sometimes turns out to be easier. So you can see how the teeth already look different. They are much more defined. So giving it that dark area next to it, that contrast really helped. Let's keep working on the skin of the character, adding those brush strokes. When you pick a color, remember to play with all three of the values to make the tone more interesting and more vibrant. Basically, right now, it's the process of kind of polishing the edges, polishing certain areas. In fact, the chin and the lips feel much more defined than they were earlier. For now, I'm using a darker tone to cover the forehead and above the eyes, as those areas are both covered by the hair. They're under the shadow. And I also want to start creating those super cute curls that are going over the cheeks of our character. I think that's one of the details that I like the most about the reference picture because it's unique and it really creates volume, makes the image much more interesting. Another thing that you guys will see me, and I'm sure you already saw, I'm using a lot, it's the color drop tool, which basically allows you to pick the color that you already have in your artwork. And I use that constantly because, of course, always having to go back and finding the color would be impossible. And this one is really helpful. So you can just either keep your finger pressed on the screen to pick the color you want, or just have that square icon near the two handles for the brush, the opacity and the size of the brush handles. So that this really helps to move things faster and to find the color you want. And most of the time I actually pick the color I already have on my artwork and then lightly change the values or tweak the saturation, brightness, and so on.
Damn, she got popping ball. How do I do that? Let's try this. No, let's get that. We gonna do. What brush was I using? I think it was this. Make this a little bit lighter. I like that. I do like that. Let's do. Get this. Shit, I gotta check my damn.
Our reference image is not the easiest one to achieve, as it has very particular shadows dropping on the skin created by the bulky hair. I like working with something a bit more challenging, so that is one of the reasons why I chose to paint this picture. But we have to be mindful of those darker shadows. I think this is the moment to think about how you want to go with your artwork regarding this, how you want to go about it, what's the process you're going to take.